First of all, welcome to everyone that is joining us today, whether you're joining us through our Zoom webinar or you're joining us on Facebook Live. We definitely appreciate that you're here and hope that we can help you answer some questions about your upcoming travels. My name is Georgianne Austin. I'm the Communications Director for Escapees RV Club. And today we're going to be talking with Courtney Wooge with FCIS Insurance. He's the president of FCIS. He took it over from his dad who founded it. And both of them have been very much enjoying the RV lifestyle for most of their lives, if I'm correct. And that's one of the things that we really appreciate about FCIS when it comes to working with them for our members, because that gives them a unique perspective over other insurance brokers where they know what it's like to live in an RV. One of my favorite things that Courtney has said before is the idea of like, kind of sets FCIS apart as we think about it. Take your car, turn it upside down and shake it, and you maybe get some gum wrappers and a cup or so falling out. And like, you don't really have to worry about insuring that kind of stuff. It's your car is what you're worried about. With an RV, you do the same thing and you have an entirely different issue. And that's one of the things that I really appreciate with FCIS is that understanding that there's a life going on inside that vehicle. It's not just a means to get from A to B anymore. And so with that, I would love for Courtney to go ahead and take a moment to introduce yourself and let us know some things about you and FCIS.
Fantastic. Thanks, Georgianne. Well, greetings, everybody. I'm actually at our New Jersey office. For those of you that are from the East Coast, there's another agency out here called the Tobin Agency that I also own. And I've got with me Nicole Linebaugh, who is the agency manager out here. And I'm living the lifestyle because I've got my 31-foot Class A gas that I'm living in right here in the parking lot. So I'm out here this week and I'll be heading back. Our home office is in Forest City, Iowa. And I am, like Georgianne said, a second-generation owner of the FCIS insurance. And I purchased and became the president about 6.5 years ago. So I'm very familiar with and grew up on RVing and RV insurance, stuffing envelopes and having fun at rallies and events and all kinds of things. So that's me and that's who I am. I've been to some of your events, and today we're going to talk about when we're down in Tucson, a country that's really close to Tucson, and that's Mexico.
Yeah, and yeah, that's one of the fun things that I've learned working with FCIS more and more is if you and Travis are very similar in that you kind of got into the business at a young age and did all kinds of things. I'm pretty sure Travis did some envelope stuffing as a kid too. So.
Right.
And joining us today also to help with any kind of member questions about the events that we have going to Mexico, we have David Goldstein, and his wife Cheryl is offline or off screen, but she's here as well. They are our Hangouts directors for Escapees. David, you want to take just a moment to introduce yourself?
Yep, there's Cheryl. She's sitting at the kitchen table there. So, yeah, she's waving. Yeah, so Cheryl and I are the directors of the Escapees Hangouts program, which started in March of this year. And it is a great program. We have our second Escapees Hangout coming up next week. And then one of the events that we're doing in Mexico is also an Escapees Hangout. We're full-time RVers. We've been on the road for about 3+ years. This will be our second time to Mexico with the Escapees. So we've jumped through a lot of the hoops that everybody else will have to jump through in the past, and can help you understand what has to go on.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And so, okay, well, with that all taken care of, we will go ahead and turn this over to Courtney and let you run, sir.
Yeah, let's run. So Mexico coverage in regards to RV insurance. I'll talk in terms of two things. Like anything insurance, some stuff is required and some stuff we recommend. The first is the easy one. When you go into Mexico, everybody ought to know that your liability is required. When you cross the border, they're going to ask, do you have Mexico liability? And guess what? If you don't, they're going to sell it to you right at the border. So that is actually from Mexico carriers. They're licensed insurance carriers in Mexico, and you have to have Mexico liability to be in Mexico. So that's number one. Number two is the physical damage piece on your RV or your tow vehicle. If you're just taking your RV, that's one asset, but if you've also got your tow vehicle, that's a second asset. So at a high level, you have to have liability on both. And I always recommend you purchase at least your liability in advance. Now, your physical damage, depending on the carrier you have, there are a magnitude of underwriting rules and what you should and should not do when and if a claim happens. So at a high level, I recommend you talk to your agent and at least in advance tell them, hey, I'm going to Mexico from this date until this date, so that it's clear what you need coverage for. And I need Mexico liability because that's what is required. And is my physical damage covered on the assets I'm bringing in? Be clear on that question. For us specifically at FCIS, we've got the five American RV carriers, and we also have the ability to sell through the Mexico carriers your liability and physical damage. So those couple things are quite a bit. Let me talk about the difference now between buying your policy through the Mexico carriers and buying it through via endorsement or your American carriers. Obviously, we know Mexico liability is required at the border. You have to buy that through a Mexican carrier. You can also buy your physical damage while you're down there through the same Mexican carrier. But guess what? At time of claim, they're going to ask that everything gets fixed in Mexico. So you kind of have to ask yourself the question, okay, while I'm down here in Mexico, if I have an incident, do I want it to be fixed in Mexico? Where am I going to be? Am I going to be in a place that maybe has proper repair shops and has some facilities in the area? Okay, then it's reasonable to think if I have an incident, I can just have everything repaired down there. My Mexico policy will cover that. Depending on the American carrier that you have for your RV, they may ask if you have a claim in Mexico to leave it there. An adjuster will come down, look at it, determine what the next steps are, but eventually they're going to want to get that vehicle back to the United States to give it to one of their approved repair shops. So again, at a high level, those are some of your options. What I'm asking is that in advance of your trip, always get this squared away. Talk to your current agent. If they don't have some of the options you have, we have those options. Be clear on when you're going in, when you're coming out, and we can help you. The last logical question is, well, how much is it going to cost? So cost is obviously always a factor, and the Mexico coverages, your liability and your physical damage, if you buy it through the Mexican carrier, is based on the number of days that you're in Mexico. You can buy these short-term policies. It's by the day, by the week, by the month, and you can even buy it annually. If you're one that's going to be going into Mexico quite frequently throughout the year, well, then buy an annual policy that you have. Endorsing your RV policy with an American carrier, again, you're going to want to talk to that agent or that carrier because there are some restrictions. Some of them have a 25-mile rule where you can go into Mexico up to 25 miles and you don't have to have the endorsement. Anything beyond 25 miles, you have to buy an endorsement or let them know where you're going, and so everything's above board from an underwriting perspective.
And we are going more than 25 miles, just in case anybody's wondering.
There you go. So more than 25 miles, take that off the table. Make sure that you ask about your RV and your auto that you're taking in. RV carriers, they do allow it via endorsement. Your auto carriers on physical damage, we do not have one that covers the physical damage. So we're always recommending if you want physical damage on your auto, you buy that through the Mexican carrier.
Courtney, can you talk a little bit about how things are different for RVers who have a trailer or other towable? So like we have a fifth wheel towed by a truck. So obviously the fifth wheel is not a powered vehicle. That's a little bit different as far as insurance goes, isn't it?
It is. So your truck is an auto, and there is, you don't have an RV policy on your auto. So your auto carrier, if you call them, I'm guessing they would not have physical damage to be covered on your auto. Now, your fifth wheel is an RV. We have RV carriers that will endorse physical damage coverage while you're in Mexico. So in that sense, it works virtually the same if it's motorized or it's towable. It's
But
just
you don't, but I guess just to clarify, if it's not motorized, you don't need liability coverage on the non-motorized vehicle.
Correct. Yes, you are correct, David. You would only need your liability on your thing with the motor, which is your truck at that point.
Right.
You don't need your liability on the trailer. That is correct. Yep. That's a good point. So if you've got a motorhome with your auto that you're towing it, both have motors, you would need to take Mexico liability as a requirement on both vehicles.
Right. Now, one of the things that I know that people did last year when they were going down, and I'm talking specifically about motorhome owners towing a vehicle, is they purchased, in order to save money, since they basically had to have 2 liability policies or 2 endorsements, they purchased a 1-day policy on their motorhome for the day that we were going down, and another 1-day policy for the day we were coming back, because the other days it's just sitting still. Operated. And then on their towed, they had to purchase one for the whole time. And so I guess one thing is, that's what people have done. Do you have any comment on that? Any issues?
Well, I do. As I hope to be a good insurance agent, I would not recommend that, because here's what tends to happen. And it's the same thing that happens when people try to put their RV in storage, maybe for the winter, and they say, look, I want to take my liability and my collision off for 6 months. Yeah, that's possible. But what happens in the event you want to leave early, or you want to get it out of storage, or whatever, it's not a good idea. Is it possible? Certainly. If you want to take the risk, certainly. I certainly don't advocate or endorse for that. Now, one could say, well, I can just call and get my Mexico liability. Well, if you're in an emergent situation and you need to leave early, insurance is the last thing you're going to think about. Trust me. Just get your policy for the day you're going in, up until your planned day you're coming out. Because again, I mean, how many days are your trips? Are they 7, 14?
10 days.
10 days. So maybe you'll save $100. Is that really worth it? Maybe it's less savings. I mean, you got to look at what's realistic.
Yeah, and I suppose somebody could always price it both ways and see what the actual savings is, and then decide if they want to take that risk.
Absolutely.
And keep in mind too that even though so that the Hangouts and Convergences both that are going have defined arrival dates and defined departure dates, we do also have the Chapter 8 of our members. It's called Mexican Connection. They're doing a full caravan through Mexico from, I think, February 12th to the 24th. And my understanding is every few days they're moving. So someone in that kind of position would definitely want an ongoing coverage versus buying days as you need it. Because there'll be a lot of little picking and choosing dates otherwise.
Yeah,
that's right.
That's right.
So one of the other things I just want to stress is your RV has some of the carriers you can get the endorsement, but again, your auto, I don't know of an auto carrier, an auto US carrier that will provide physical damage in Mexico.
And that's interesting, because with ours, we're in kind of a strange situation. We had exactly the reverse situation. So we have our insurance on our truck through USAA.
Okay.
USAA does not write RV policies, so they basically sub that out to Progressive.
Yep.
It's Progressive through USAA. Our USAA truck policy said we're covered in Mexico for property damage, not liability, just so that nobody's confused. You cannot use your US carrier for liability insurance. Right. You got to get an endorsement or a separate policy. I'm just talking about for damage to the vehicle. Right. We were covered in Mexico. The Progressive policy said we were covered for property damage as long as we had purchased a Mexican liability policy on the auto. So I think the takeaway there is, I suspect, and tell me if this is right, every domestic insurer is probably a little bit different about what they will cover or not cover in Mexico. and you got to talk to your carrier or talk to your agent and find out what your policy.
Bingo, you hit the nail right on the head. Every circumstance is different, and sometimes your auto and your RV is split up between two different carriers. You really want to have that conversation in advance of you going down there.
But regardless, you will need some kind of supplementary Mexican liability insurance.
Absolutely. That's what's required. You have to, it's 100% guaranteed. They're going to ask for at least liability at the border.
Yep.
Now, on a side note, some people, maybe their tow vehicle isn't worth very much. So they don't care to have, they'll take the risk and just buy the liability. Now, the RV is different. The RVs, typically, people want to have physical damage on their RVs.
While we're talking about liability, someone just asked on the Facebook feed asking, did I hear correctly that my towed travel trailer does not require Mexican liability insurance because it does not have a motor?
Do you know, is that correct, Nicole?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a non-motorized vehicle.
Yep.
Okay. So and I'm asking for my own clarification as well. So for example, they're pulling a fifth wheel, they're pulling through a gas station and they clip something too closely and their RV does damage to a vehicle or something else and not the vehicle pulling the RV. Is that something that would then be under the liability of the motor vehicle, or like how does that play out?
Motor vehicle,
Yeah.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I asked that question specifically last year, and that's the answer.
Okay.
Yep.
We have several other questions still too from attendees. And so a couple of things about return dates. Somebody has asked, for example, they're going to go to one of our more stationary events, the Hangout or Convergence, and they're going to stay in one area for extended period of time for that event. But then when everybody packs up and heads back to the US, they're going to continue going further down into Mexico. So in that case, there's not really a firm return date. How do you suggest they approach making sure that they have coverage the way they need to have it if they don't know exactly when they're going to come back before they purchase it?
Well, how I would handle that is if you don't have a return date, then I would buy the annual policy, which is going to be more expensive because you don't know when you're coming back. And then when in fact you do come back, cancel it early and get your prorated refund.
Okay. Is there any benefit to, I did see that someone suggested to them to set an estimated end date, and then if they find that they're going to extend that further, to then look into doing additional days. Which option do you think would be more appropriate?
Nicole, do you have any
It's
advice?
probably cheaper, less expensive to purchase a one-year policy. So in that regard, it's unless they have a specific date, they don't know if it's going to be a month or 2 months, but not over 2 months. I would guesstimate for the 2 months, but it's probably cheaper. You probably get a better discount for doing a full annual policy than a few months policy.
That makes sense.
Yeah, there is. It is weird once we rate it. Sometimes if you select a longer period, it can actually be a little cheaper than a shorter period. I don't know, some of these actuaries sit in windowless rooms and they come up with these rates, and we don't have any liberty to change the rates, so we can only punch in the dates and see what happens.
That makes sense. Another question we have from somebody who's tuning in over Zoom, they've asked what is generally covered and what is generally not covered by a motorhome policy? For example, vandalism, theft, that sort of thing.
Yes, is that question specifically Mexico or overall?
I think it is meant for Mexico, yes.
Yeah, he's asking about Mexico property damage to the RV while you're in Mexico.
Yes, so through the Mexican carriers as well as the American carriers, perils of theft and fire and what you would consider normal losses would be covered, right? But at time of loss, an adjuster gets assigned to it and they ask those questions. Certainly if there are weird circumstances that happen, and I've seen some, I won't go into them, but you know, if there's a brick laying on your accelerator and they go to investigate it, you know, they'll look at that. So yes, the peril of fire and theft are covered physical damages.
And probably crime also. I mean, I
Yes.
guess really any kind of criminal activity that results in damage would be covered.
Yes, absolutely. That's correct. Yep.
All right. Going back to some of the, like we're talking about what's being covered and what's not being covered. I know a conversation you and I had several weeks prior to this webinar was being aware of where gaps in coverage may occur. Do you have any advice for, I mean, I know of course it comes down to reading the fine print, but do you have any advice on where to be more vigilant of those kinds of issues or anything like that?
I would say it's gaps in coverage on choosing physical damage on your American policy or a Mexican policy. You kind of have to decide, all right, do I want physical damage, A, so I need to ask those questions, and B, then it becomes, do I want it physical damage coverage from a Mexican carrier or a United States carrier? And the two trains of thought are, if you're deep into Mexico, do you really want to go through the hassle to try to get the RV or the auto drug all the way back to the United States to be repaired? So if you're in a decent area of Mexico, there are facilities down there that will repair. So that's kind of the call chain you have to ask yourself is, do I want my coach or auto repaired in Mexico or repaired in the United States? Right. Yep. And that, Progressive does a pretty good job. We've got 4 others that got strange provisions in them, depending on circumstance and mileages. And then you've got, an adjuster that you get assigned to that maybe you can say, look, I'd really just prefer to have this thing towed back to the United States right now, and hopefully use some judgment at time of loss.
Courtney, can you talk a little bit about liability limits that you should purchase for Mexico? I mean, is it a good idea to buy the same level of coverage that you have in the United States, or is it okay to have less, more? What do you recommend?
I would recommend what you have in the United States, because some people have umbrellas, and those umbrellas have that underlying coverage and need to satisfy those underlying limits. So if you've got 100, 300, I would match those for your Mexico policy. If it's 250, 500, again, to your point, David, you're spot on. I would exactly match those. And that's for umbrella cases. And, you've already made that decision. I would not lower them. And, for umbrella cases, I would not raise them either if that's what you want to do.
Okay. And then the other thing I wondered if you can comment on a little bit, and you can use me as a punching bag maybe. So last year I bought my Mexican liability coverage. After I checked and I found out what I needed, I determined I only needed Mexican liability coverage on my motorized vehicle, our truck. Yeah. And I bought that online. I shopped 2 different companies, both of which had been recommended by several different, both Mexico tour agencies that deal in Mexico, and some other people, RVers who had been. I didn't need it, so I don't have any claims experience with it. It was quite a bit less expensive. Actually, there was a pretty big difference in price between the 2 agencies, which I thought was interesting. Any comment on that? I mean, I think I paid like $86 for 7 days worth of coverage.
Liability
only, yeah.
Yep, that sounds right. We use a broker out of Scottsdale, and they have access to 3 Mexican carriers. I honestly don't know the number of Mexican carriers that offer Mexico liability. We just have the 3, and what we do is we rate that with those 3 carriers, and it's still a free country, so you're right. You can look around and see. I would be careful, because like anything, you can buy a lot of stuff online, but you've got to make sure it's from an A-rated, reputable carrier. Check the reviews, check the claims history, if any. Make sure when you put your credit card information in, it's not going to some other country that
won't do you any good.
That's exactly
other
right.
Things. Yeah.
So that's like anything in life. Just be careful what you pay for, and make sure it's reputable. So if you're one that analyzes that, then that's good to know.
And talking about potential cost, just something that somebody sent me over email earlier this week in preparation for today, just kind of getting an idea of what's reasonable to expect cost-wise. Bob stated that his road trek, which is valued at $50,000, is currently covered via State Farm, and they tell him that he has no coverage in Mexico. So when he took a trip earlier this year, he ended up paying more than $400 for full coverage for a full 90 days through a different company. Is that price normal to expect? Are there less expensive options? Or like, what are your thoughts? Like, what can people expect cost-wise?
Yep. So that's a great question. So he purchased a physical damage and liability on a road trek, and I would say $400 really doesn't seem high to me. Because you've got that physical damage component built in there. It doesn't seem abnormal to me. Now, if he said $1,000, that would tell me that that's really high and that's probably out there. But that's 3 months worth of coverage in Mexico. So the analytics suggest that it probably will cost more if you have a claim in Mexico, depending on where you're at. And by the way, I will tell you, different areas of Mexico have different rates. Oh, yeah. So this could have been, without knowing where this individual went, it could have been deep somewhere, and I don't know. Maybe the analytics showed that zip code was high in some sort of peril for insurance. So there are different rates based on where you're going. Technology has helped us and hurt us with respect to getting granular detail on rates on zip codes.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, even in the US, you can look at 4 different cities in Texas, and they all return different rates based on, like I said, the risk factors of that area.
Yep.
Like population density, crime, all that kind of stuff.
Right. Absolutely.
So we have a question from someone on Facebook wondering, are Mexican carriers rated like US carriers?
Yes, they have ratings to them. Okay. So there are A-rated, B-rated, admitted, non-admitted. And that's why we choose as an agency only to deal with A-rated admitted carriers. So that's why I say be careful. And if you buy something online, look at the reviews, look at their rating to make sure that they have the excess and surplus available to pay claims. Because again, to David's point, if it just goes somewhere and they can't pay your claim, I don't know what the recourse would be. But with an A-rated carrier, at least you'd have some governance on recourse, and that they're solvent.
Something else I wanted to mention, just in case anybody's thinking about trying to avoid this extra cost for Mexican liability insurance, don't do it. Obviously, there's some good reasons. You might get checked at the border. We didn't, because we went through with the caravan. But if you are in an accident that you potentially caused, or you caused somebody else's property damage, police will ask for your Mexico insurance card. And unlike in the United States, where if you're not insured, they write you a ticket. In Mexico, my understanding is they will send you directly to jail, where you will stay until the claim is settled, because they don't want you leaving the country. At that point, you would definitely wish you had liability insurance through a Mexican carrier. So it is not a good idea to try to go without this and hope you can get by.
Right.
And something, I'm looking at the chat here in Zoom, and somebody brought up a good point that if you are considering, let me think through what I'm about to say before I keep rambling. If you are considering a long-term policy that you may cancel earlier, for example, if you go ahead and book for a year because you're going to be in Mexico for quite a few months, but you're really not going to be there the full year and you want to cancel and get that refund, check up front to make sure that is something that they will do, so that you don't dish out that money and then find out that they don't allow that they don't offer those kinds of services if you do cancel prior to the end of your contract.
Good point. I mean, we try to deal with the A-rated carriers, and they do, but wherever you buy it, right, they may have a provision in that policy that says it's all paid in full and there are no prorated refunds based on canceling early. It's a great point. See, that sounds like he can be an insurance agent. Tell him to give me a call.
I want to mention one other thing. If you decide to go the online route, both carriers that I quoted with last year automatically assumed that I wanted to purchase the property damage coverage, because of course they make money on that also if you buy it. And so if you do go looking online, make sure that once you go through the quote process that you decline the property coverage if you have determined that your US coverage will extend to Mexico. So obviously you need to do that first. But both carriers will ask you for all the specifics on your RV, the year and the length and other stuff like that that'll help them figure a value. And then the first price you'll get will be kind of a shocker, because it's going to include property damage coverage also, but you can waive that as long as you know you're covered through your US carrier.
Yep. Good point. It's like anything, and just ask the right questions and make sure you are upfront about what you're doing. The good news is, not to get too off topic, but the good news is our friends to the north in Canada, all they require is to show your valid card from a United States carrier.
Nice.
Much easier.
So,
Oh yeah.
You're a little better, I guess, off if you're going to Canada. But Mexico is a little warmer, and they've got nice beaches down there.
Mm-hmm.
For listening, and for Georgianne for putting this on, and David for your candid feedback, and let us know if you want to chat with us. You can call or email us, and we'll be here.
Yep. The website to reach out to Courtney and FCIS is very easy. It's FCISinsurance.com. We've pasted it in a couple of places in the chat, but just in case you jot it down, it's FCISinsurance.com. And that'll put you in touch with one of Courtney's agents to answer all kinds of questions. I've heard some really great feedback from members that I've sent your way. So I'm confident that you guys will be able to help with most situations. Maybe not everything, but I haven't seen anything yet that you can't help with. So
yeah, we've got about 25 agents. So a lot of people say they want to talk to me. Well, I'm usually doing a webinar with the Escapees. So there's a lot of other trained agents, including Nicole, that can certainly help out. So
definitely. And speaking of what you guys offer, I actually have a question come in. What carriers do you guys offer?
For in the United States, we have, I'm just looking at them here, Nationwide, Progressive, Foremost, National General, and Safeco are the 5 carriers that we have right now in the United States.
I think something that's important to clarify for people who are watching, that FCIS is a brokerage. They are not the carrier themselves. And so one of the things that can be really beneficial with that is you can talk with Courtney or another agent and say, here are the things that I think I need. They can confirm what you can and can't get, but then also help you compare options across multiple carriers to find the coverage, the price point, that sort of thing that work best for you. Yep. You're not stuck with a single carrier because that's all that they know about.
Yep.
Hey, I've got one more question for Courtney, and you may have addressed this and I missed it, but just in case. If somebody already has U.S. auto insurance and they just need to buy the Mexico liability insurance, can they still come through you for that, even if you're not covering their other stuff?
Absolutely, we can. We can sell them standalone Mexico liability. We have, absolutely. Okay. Yep. Good. We just say, look, if you like us, give us a call when you're ready on the other stuff. But no, we're not too pushy. But yeah, we can just do the Mexico liability. Good question.
Okay. Yeah, but I guess I didn't figure you were going to be pushy. I guess my question was really more directed to, can it be sold as a standalone as opposed to an endorsement on an existing
It is,
policy?
and it really is. The Mexico liability is a completely standalone policy.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. And so to tidy up a couple of loose ends, I've seen some questions from different people asking what else are we going to talk about. This particular webinar is specifically to cover RV insurance. So we brought Courtney on board because I know that he's got some in-depth knowledge with this. I'll be the one organizing it. I'm hoping to also put one together in a couple of weeks where we'll get some government agencies to assist in answering questions about permits and border crossings and that sort of thing. So that information is hopefully, fingers crossed, hopefully coming soon. I need to make sure I can get enough people on board to do that. The speakers, we have plenty of attendees with lots of questions. I got to get people who know their stuff to talk to you about it. And then also this particular webinar will be available for replay at a later time. We're going to take it down and make sure that we've got all the information correct, insert links where we can to answer quick questions and make it easier to get through. And so this will be available as a replay after today. And those who signed up via Zoom, who registered through that page, will get a link to it. Also, I will very likely send it back out to the same people who reached out to when we said this was available, so that we can make sure that you guys all have the information that you are looking for. And again, if you have any questions about insurance for Courtney, you can go to FCISinsurance.com and connect with one of his agents. If you have questions about our events, you can reach out to us at clubbusiness@escapees.com, and they will either direct you to the event director that can answer your question, or they have quite a bit of information. Our member services team is pretty well equipped to answer most basic questions about our events. And so, but anyway, I hope that we've covered everything for all of you, at least that we're able to answer in this session. And if you have any more questions, feel free to reach out to us. Thank you so much for attending, and thank you, Courtney, thank you, Nicole, and thank you, David, for joining us.
Right on. Have some fun, guys.
Yep. Thanks, Courtney. Thanks, Georgianne.
You bet.